Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's been a busy last couple weeks, but I am back. Today we're going to be looking at Express.js routes in the router object. Now, routing simply refers to how an application endpoint responds to client requests. So with that said, let's get into it. So in my previous video, I went over creating a Node Express server in less than 3 minutes. You can find the link in the top right and in this video description. I'm going to be using the sample code from that video as a starting point, and you can find the code in the video description as well. So this example is going to require that you have Node installed, and to check whether you have Node installed, it's going to be a simple command line here. So I'm going to go down to my terminal, seen down here. I'm going to type in Node-v. If you see a version here, you have Node installed. If you see an error, it means you don't have Node installed, and you're going to have to go to the Node website to install it. I'll provide a link to the Node website in my video description as well. So let's start here. The first thing we want to do here is we want to take a look at our entry point, which is going to be index.js. And once again, I'm using the source code from the existing video as a starting point. Now, there's not too much going on here. We're pulling in our Express middleware and exposing the Express top level function exported by the Express module. This is going to allow us to attach our router and any other middleware that we might require. Now, I'm just going to skip ahead to the last line here, this entire line down here. In the last line, we're telling Express to listen on either a port provided by the environment variables or just use the default port or default the port to port 3000. In this file here, we have a single route declaration. It's a simple GET request, and I'll add a link in the description that gives you a bit more details about different HTTP verbs. Now, the GET request shown here is an example that uses the root of your web server, the root of your application. It's denoted by the / that you're seeing here. That's the first parameter. Now, since my server is running locally on port 3000, as you can see down here, to make a request, I'd simply make a call to localhost port 3000. Actually, let me switch over here and show you guys. This is just a REST extension for Visual Studio Code. I'm going to click send a request. For this request here, we're just doing a get. And we can see here the response to the message that says, Hola, mi amiga. And if we go back to our index.js here, we can see that that was the response that this get request is sending back. Okay, so let's close this part here. So having the route declared in line is fine for small applications, but as the application's code base gets larger and more complex, it's probably preferable to move the routes into separate files. So let's do that. So let's create a folder for a route. So I'm in my terminal here. Let's do ls, see what we got. We have our index.js file, our node modules, and our package.json files here. So we're going to create a folder called routes. We're just going to use the terminal command, make dir, and we're going to call it routes. Do a ls. We can see that our routes folder is now created. So now we want to actually navigate into that folder, and we're going to create another folder. We're going to call this user. We're going to use this folder to further organize our routes as well. So this is going to be for user specific routes, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do a make dir, and we're going to call this user, and then we're going to navigate into this folder as well. So right now there's nothing in this folder. We're going to create an index.js file, and this is going to be holding our routes. And if we do ls, we can see our files created here. So let's come over here and we'll take a peek. We can see our routes, user, and index.js created here now. So now that we have this file, we want to go back over to our index.js, and we're going to grab this here. Actually, we're going to grab all this here, and we're going to come back over to user. We're going to paste this in, and we're going to make one small change here. We no longer need this app express because we're not in the main application. Instead, we're going to leverage the router object that is sitting within the Express module here. So let's do that here. We're going to declare a const. We're going to call this router, and we're going to say that's equal to Express, and we want to get access to the Express.router object that we have here. All right, now that we have this router object, we no longer have app or application here. We're just going to switch app with the router that we have here. So let me copy this, paste it there, and then I'm going to switch back over to my index.js. Since this is moved into a different file, we no longer need it here. And here is where we're going to be adding our user routes later on in this tutorial. So let's flip back over to index.js under our user routes folder here. So one thing to know is we're gaining access to express.router. And a router instance is a complete middleware and routing system. And remember, routing refers to how an application endpoint handles requests. So let's add our other routes here. So we want to add routes for post, put, and delete as well. So I'm going to copy this here. And we're going to start off with a post request, and I'm going to change this to post. We're going to leave the path the same, which is just a request at the root. And we're going to change, actually we're going to add a few other things here. So whenever you're doing a post request, you're always sending along a body with it. So I'm going to use string interpolation, and I'm going to say request dot body. That's how you get the body or the data that's sent up with the post request there. And in request.body, I'm going to say I'm looking for a username as well. And so we're going to copy this here, and we're going to change this message that we have here. Actually, we're going to change this entire string, change it to string interpolation. I'm going to say hola, and we're going to say hello to whatever username is passed up. Now, in order to parse up any JSON that's sent up in the body here, there's a couple of things that we need to add to our main application. So I'm going to switch back over to the index.js under our main application here, and I'm going to add a couple of things here. So I'm going to add app.use express URL encoded, set extended to true, and express.json. Now, these are built-in middleware functions in Express, and they allow parsing incoming requests with JSON payloads. All right, now that we have our middleware for parsing our JSON payloads, there's one other thing that we need to add. We're going to want to pull in the user routes over here as middleware, but in order to do that, we need to jump back over to our index.js under the user folder, and we need to add an exports to it. Now, this is saying export this router object here along with the routes attached to it. And now let's save this. We can go back over here to our index.js. I'm going to say app.use, and it's going to take a parameter. For now, we're just going to set the first parameter as the root of the application, and then now we can do a require. And here is where we're going to passing the location of our routes for our user specific paths. All right, save. Everything's still running. So now let's test out our newly created routes. So we have our routes declared here, our get and our post, and we can come over here, test to make sure that's still running. Yep, still working. Hola mi amiga. And then now we can test out the post that we have here. So we're doing a post to localhost 3000. And here's the payload that we're passing in. Username, Fabian, password, freelancer12. And so if we highlight this here, do a send request, we see hola undefined, and I think I know why. Just let me modify this here. Put a space there. This is the Visual Studio Code REST extension that I'm using. And let's make this request again and see if it works this time. Yep, perfect. Hola Fabian. So remember, this is the username that we had passed up in the request body. So if we switch back over here, we can see that we have the username here. Let's log that down here. And the payload that's being returned back, request body.username. All right, perfect. So we have post working. All right, so let's move on to the next one here. And actually, let me close. Give us a little bit of space to work with. We can close this. All right, so the next one we want to do is the put. And that's going to be a matter of changing this verb here. And this is a bit different because we're going to be passing in a ID parameter. And the ID parameter is always prefixed with a slash, a colon, and then whatever the name of the parameter is. So in this case, we want the name of the parameter to be ID. It could be user ID or whatever you decide to pass in, but let's call it ID for now. And we're going to access the ID parameter here a little bit differently. So instead of request.body, we're going to do request.params here, and we're going to change username to ID. Let's just copy this here, and we'll paste that there, and we'll just say changing, let's say user ID. So now let's test out our put here. I'm going to copy this little portion here, and we'll switch back over here. This is our put call that we have here, and we'll paste this down here just so you have it there for reference. This colon ID here is referring to everything after the root of our REST endpoint that we have here. If we were to do this and change this to something else, this here represents an ID. This here also represents a different ID. So let's get rid of that. And let's just do a quick test on this. Send a request. See, ID is 12342. If we do a test on this, the ID is 1 and some gibberish after that. So perfect, our put works. So remember, if you're passing in a parameter, it always needs to be denoted by a colon and then the name of the actual parameter that you're passing in. And of course, we could do something similar to this as well, where we pass in another parameter, maybe name and so forth. And you can make this as long as you want. If we did add this secondary parameter here, name, we'd actually have to change our URL. So let me just reference this name parameter that we're now sending up. And then if I do a call to this here, you're going to see that it's going to fail because it's expecting a pattern where we're passing an ID and then we pass in a name as well. So let's pass in Fabian. And then if I do a put to this again, just a quick test, we can see that now works. And that's because we're referencing params.name here. And the name parameter is pulled from this parameter passed in the URL up here. So let's change this back here to ID. And let's just get rid of this for now. Let's go back here. And we'll just get rid of that. All right. All right, so next on the block here, we want to do a delete. And a delete is going to be very similar to our put here. It's going to take in the ID of a user or whatever you want to delete. And we're going to log out the ID as well. And in this case, we're just going to say delete user because we just want to see that we're calling our delete right here. All right, so let's go over and test this one as well. So we're going to copy this for put down here. And then we're just going to say delete. All right, so you should see something saying delete with this ID appended to the message as well. If we test that, delete user 12342, add a different ID, 12342, some gibberish. So we know our delete routes work. All right, so we have all our routes set up here, our get, our post, our put, and delete. Now let's close this here. I'm going to switch back over to my index.js for the main application. I want to make one last change here. So here we have our user routes coming through the root of our application. We can actually add a path here. I'm going to add a path user. And this is just going to help us further organize everything and make it a bit more intuitive as to what routes belong to where. And now that we've made this change here, we need to go back over to our test.rest here. And I'm just going to do a quick test here. And this is going to fail here, because now it's expecting a user prefix. So if you do /user and then do request again, we can see that that works. And then for all these other routes, they're going to need to be prefixed with the user as well. So if we test out our put here, see our put works. Same thing with our delete. And then finally our last one here, our post. Perfect. So all our routes are working. Now they're all prefixed with user. And this is just following RESTful API convention, and it makes your routes a bit more intuitive and easier to organize. So let's jump back over to the main application here. Say tomorrow you wanted to add routes specific to a shopping cart, some sort of shopping cart function. You would have something similar to this where you would have it prefixed with cart, and then all your routes would sit under a cart folder as well. And as you can see, we no longer have our routes inline. Instead, we have our routes separated out into different folders, which makes it a lot easier to organize. So that's going to wrap up our video for today. And as usual, if you found this video informative and helpful, remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment. Just let me know what you guys are up to. And remember to check the description. I'm going to be providing the links to the source code for this video and for the video previous to this as well. So with that said, see you guys in the next video. Peace.